Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just while we are preparing the seating for the next panel, we are going to have another of our polls. So if you get your phones out and you get your WSDS 19 app poised, we have our question. Is India on track to be powered mainly by renewable energy by 2050? So you've heard a lot of perspectives on this in the last panel. So let's see what you think. Let's do our 15th referendum. All right, we're coming to the results. And there we are. So, yeah, optimism with a touch of realism. Just a fraction over 50%. This is so like the Brexit referendum, it's uncanny. Just a touch over 51%, and we have optimism India could be powered mainly by renewables. About a quarter of you think that's impossible, which would be grim news for India and all the rest of us. And a quarter don't know, which is probably realistic. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to our next session. I'm just going to check the layout here. So the next session is on rural electricity access in India. You heard Rachel Kite earlier stress the importance of that. We're going to look at how to take a leap from grid availability to customer service. So I'd like to invite our panelists up onto the stage, if I may. I think they're all with us. So may I invite Mr. Jaideep Mukherji, who's CEO of Smart Power India. Mr. Sidhartha Vermani, who's Senior Director of Smart Power India. Mr. R.P. Gupta, Additional Secretary Energy, Niti Aayog. Mr. K.K. Mishra, who's Director of Renewable Energy at the Ministry of Power, India. Ms. Mukherjee, who's Program Ambassador of the International Solar Alliance. Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General of TERI. And our moderator, Mr. Sreenivasan Jain, who's Managing Editor at NDTV. So we'll gather you all here, and then we'll invite some opening remarks. We're also marking the launch of a very interesting report prepared by Smart Power India.
Okie dokie. Can I squeeze in from here? Yes. Right, thank you.
Okay, so I think just while we're waiting for the last couple of panelists, I think if I might invite Mr. Jaideep Mukherji to share a few remarks with us. Sir.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here today for this session. We are about to discuss the launch. We are about to launch and discuss this report about Indian rural electrification, focusing on customer behavior and demand. I just want to tell you as to why we thought it was important to do this study, which is the largest ever study of rural electricity customers in India. We found that there is a collective perception about the Indian rural electricity customer. And the perception is that they get cheap, subsidized electricity, but they don't want to pay for it. And most don't pay for it. The other is that they consume very little and the consumption stays that way. The third is that it's very difficult to service the rural electricity customer. So is this a perception or is this a myth? So we went on to discover, and this report shines a light on that. But why is it important to find this out? Why is it important to get the perspective of the rural electricity customer towards their behavior and demand for electricity? What do they want? What is missing? Now, why it is very important to know this is that thanks to the government's continued effort and the recent push through the Saubhagya program, India is very close to achieving 100% household level electrification for willing household customers. That's how it's defined. But I think a tremendous progress has been made in reaching electricity network and connecting rural households. And we are on the threshold of almost universal household electrification. But because of this very reason of servicing a large number of rural household customers, that most state discom chiefs, that is the state utilities who service these customers, are extremely fearful that their losses are about to mount. And recently, one report says that losses have actually started mounting. I hope the findings from this report is going to shine a light and provide some clues for the state utilities and other stakeholders to find a way to break this logjam, this doom loop of perennial and mounting losses, and break out of this loop into a virtuous cycle where they can provide sustainable operations and services and create well-being for the rural customers. Thank you. I look forward to discussing this with you.
Thank you so much, and I'd like to invite Mr. Sidhartha Vermani to say a few words to introduce the report to us. And he isn't here as yet. So, there you are.
Sneaked in from behind.
Presenter. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Jaideep, and good afternoon, friends. I've been allotted 5 minutes, and I'm going to take that 5 minutes today, this morning, on the podium. So it's a real privilege to be here. This report that Jaideep was just talking about contains a lot of rich data. But today I'm sharing only a few important data points from this report, and then look forward to the distinguished panelists to later discuss how to take the leap from infrastructure availability to customer service. So with no further delays, let me just dive into the findings of this work. This survey was conducted across 4 states of India at the height of Saubhagya program's implementation, and it covered more than 10,000 households and more than 2,000 microenterprises across 200 villages. The survey had 3 main areas of inquiry. First, what is really the state of the access? Number 2, what is a typical baseline demand in a typical village in India? And finally, what is the customer satisfaction with the supply and service of electricity today? Let me also remind you, this is one of the first surveys which has actually covered micro-enterprises in a very large way. Like we are talking about more than 2,000 micro-enterprises across these 4 states. The first significant finding is that access, if we were to measure that by the availability of infrastructure, was very high across all these 4 states, which means that anywhere between 82 to 98% of the population across these 4 states had a pole and a cable available for connection. I'll specifically like to sort of point out to the data of Bihar on this slide, which talks about nearly 97% availability rate and nearly 93% availability rate for micro enterprises. However, availability does not equal adoption. And while the availability of infrastructure is high, overall, 75% of the households hooked up to the connection across all these 4 states. And while we can see that Bihar, Orissa, and Rajasthan show a hookup rate of more than 90%, UP is displaying only 58%. I do hope that UP has displayed more progress in hooking up households over the last few months. We also noticed that as a result of so many households hooking up, the usage of kerosene as a source of lighting has become nearly insignificant in these states. Now, while the household connectivity has been undertaken at a mission scale under Saubhagya, the number of micro enterprises connected to the grid remains pretty low. Only 65% of the micro enterprises which were surveyed were connected to this grid, and 43% were actually using non-grid sources, including diesel. One must not forget that these enterprises are an important part of the rural economy and also significant demand centers of electricity. Breaking it down further, we found that the low micro-enterprise connections is primarily true for the states of UP and Bihar. In fact, in Bihar, we saw that nearly 19% of the micro-enterprises were using diesel as their primary source of electricity, even now. So there is a strong case for connecting these micro-enterprises, as they already are paying for diesel or for fuel every day, and they are going to be potentially paying customers. Finally, the only barometer for success is customer satisfaction, or let's say citizen satisfaction with a public service. And only 60% of the grid users were satisfied with the DISCOM services across these 4 states. In fact, such high level of dissatisfaction is a cause of concern because it leads to poor perceptions of the value for money. I must also point out that one standout performance across these 4 states was that of Orissa, which displayed very high levels of customer satisfaction. And if we sort of remove Orissa out of this total, we might probably be looking at much worse figures for customer satisfaction. So finally, what does this really lead to? First, it leads to poor value perception for the DISCOM's electricity. Customers say that if there is no supply, what should I really pay for? Second, it leads to poor appliance ownership. Customers say that what is the point of actually buying or investing in an appliance if the electricity is so unreliable? Third, it leads to micro enterprises using diesel. And finally, it leads to low per capita electricity consumption. So in the context of these findings, we all look forward to the distinguished panelists to further discuss these issues and also discuss that how do we take this leap from infrastructure availability to consumer service. But before that, over to you, Martin, for the launch of the report.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite the panel to launch the report. I believe we have the report here. That's Rural Electrification in India, Customer Behaviour and Demand. Take a seat, sir. Excellent. And now I will hand over to Mr. Jain to conduct the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for being here, and also thanks to our panel. Now, this is obviously a very important subject that doesn't get enough attention in the public conversation, and certainly speaking as a media practitioner, I would say we are guilty as well of not focusing enough on power to rural India. And I think it's an interesting idea to use this survey as a starting point because it challenges many of the assumptions and many of the claims that have been made about the success in rural electrification that we've been hearing over the past several years. So I'm going to try and keep this as simple as possible. So I'd request our panelists, many of whom are very distinguished domain experts, to also try and keep it as simple and as relatable as possible. Let's not try to get into too much jargon and too much technical talk, so that it's accessible both to our audience here and, of course, to a wider audience that will also be watching this. What we discussed was that we would have an introductory set of comments by everybody here for about 3 minutes, or preferably even less, so that we get more of a time for a conversation after that. So let me just set the ball rolling. Perhaps if we could start off with you, Mr. Mathur from TERI, about your take on this gap between the success, in a sense, of rural electrification and the fact that there's this consumer unhappiness. Do we have, I think you're already mic'd, or you're not mic'd?
I am not mic'd. Is everybody else mic'd? That's my.
You can use this, and then, yeah, no, go ahead. But let's get, can we get another mic? Yeah.
Sreenivasan, first of all, I think this is a great report. For the first time, we are looking at a vast number of households and micro enterprises to figure out what are the kinds of real living situation that occurs in these areas. There's no doubt that in a month or so, nearly 100% of households will be connected to the grid. But what I want to focus this report's out, and that's the first point I want to make. Connectivity does not equal reliable supply. That's something that has to be built up. And one of the things I'd like to leave on the table for further discussion is the role of distributed generation, particularly what are independent microgrids. How do you integrate them when every household is already connected? That's the first point. The second point is behavior. The survey has brought out how customers actually make investment decisions of not buying, for example, electric appliances, because I'm not going to be able to use it. One of the things that we found, and my colleague Debajit Palit is here, that consumers are willing to pay, and pay actually relatively heavy amounts for reliable electricity. Yes, as they get more and more and more electricity, their willingness to pay kind of declines. So there is an initial high level of ability to, or willingness to pay, which declines as more and more electricity gets supplied. So at some point they get into grid tariffs, when you're. But I think the short point to this is, can we therefore think of energy efficient appliances and distributed generation at the same time? Is it possible that packages which offer both reliable electricity supply and efficient devices, so that based on this supply they have, they would be able to work this out? These are the two questions I think I'd leave on the table.
Okay.
And I hope that we can visit them again as we go along.
Okay, all right. Can I just turn to you, sir, next, Mr. Mishra from the Power Ministry, if you'd like to respond to some of these points. I think you're already mic'd, so
Oh, yes.
you should be fine.
So I comment on the report findings, or should I make my comments?
Whatever you prefer.
Okay. I'll give, okay, let me first comment on the report, then I'll say something, add on to it.
Okay.
So as a true student of statistics, I'll criticize the report on that small sample. As a true, critique, I'll say, findings are, maybe there is some fault. But okay, honestly, on a serious note, I'll say it's a very good report. And it's not much deviant of our learning. The major deviation was about the UP, if I'm not wrong, from the findings. And it is, I think that survey was conducted in what months? October, November, I believe?
Yes.
Yes. So UP has electrified most of its households in last 3 months. So in October, November, December, they have done the largest chunk of their electrification, and that too is on the grid. So if the survey is to be repeated, maybe after some time, the percentage will again come for more than 95% for UP too. Second is the part of supply, which Dr. Mathur also raised, that access is not equal to supply. we have to start at some place. These are the villages or the habitations or the households which didn't had access to electricity even after so many years of electricity being introduced in other parts of country and other households. So the first step is obviously providing the access. First, we provided electricity to the concerned villages and the hamlets and the habitations, and now to every household. So very soon we'll be declaring universal household electrification in the country. So next target, it's not utopia, certainly. We are just moving towards the next level. So what is the next level? We have already taken up with the state governments and the UTs to provide 24/7 power for all from 1st of April 2019. So it is already a documented, signed initiative between Government of India and state governments, and we are working towards it. So certainly supply is an issue. If unless and until, if as a consumer, somebody has put up meter at my home, somebody has put wires at my home, but there is no electricity, doesn't mean anything. So as a policy maker, I prefer to think from a consumer's perspective. What is that I'm getting at the end of the day? Am I getting electricity in my house? If that is not there, all this doesn't mean anything. But as a stepping stone, I will not undermine the achievement which the country has achieved in last few years on providing electricity access to all the households in the country. That is a big achievement. And in every such forum, I always say that, if we still doubt the functional utility of electricity, let's switch off the light for 5-10 minutes and we appreciate that. And I was very surprised, I'm sure in one of the international journals in the last week edition they published, I'm sure Dr. Mathur, you must have read it, they said that, electricity is not providing that kind of utility to the rural households and poor. I was very surprised on the findings, and I would like to go, that is another, the things to be discussed. Okay. Regarding the microgrid, personally, I think the first preference of any consumer is to get connected through the grid, because that is more assured power. Comparing a model which is being adopted by developed countries, especially US and Western Europe, to India might not be that feasible. I agree, microgrids and have their special role in providing all the access, but in the long run, we should strive for providing electricity access through grid.
Okay. All right, okay. Can I just bring in Mohua Mukherjee at this stage, because we're still talking about renewable power, we're talking about conventional sources of power, but what about solar? Where does that feature in all this?
I'm not mic'd.
Oh, you're not mic'd as well? Okay, you can certainly take my mic. Can we get another mic up here, please?
Okay.
No, yeah.
Thank you so much. Can we put up the slide that I had asked for there on the, somebody able to do that? There's one slide. Oh yeah, this is the slide. It's up, it's up, it's up. Okay, so thank you so much. On today's topic of rural service delivery, I'd like to echo the words of Dr. Mathur, which is, how do we actually reconcile the Paris Accords promise as well as the Sustainable Development Goals, and look at how do we meet the energy needs of the regular average person with solar energy. This is the mission of the International Solar Alliance, which I'm representing today. I'd just like to show you these few things. These are appliances that are already available on the market. We've got the fan, we've got a refrigerator, freezer, we've got lights, we've got a vaccine cooler, we've got a laptop, TV, street lights, a school and a clinic, solar pump, and a cold storage hub on the lower left for produce, harvest, post-harvest produce. Now, these are all available, but the challenge which the ISA is really working hard on is how to make these affordable to people. We don't want people to have to take on loans in order to be able to actually get these energy services like lighting, cooling, entertainment, communication, whatever. Why should they have to take on a personal loan? So what we are striving for at ISA is how to set up a financing arrangement so that the end consumer can be asked to pay only small, affordable installments. And that's the financial engineering we are currently working on. We actually see 4 markets in the rural area for service delivery. One is the personal household use of lights, fans, TVs, fridges, whatever. So that's the personal household market. Then there is the market of the community productivity enhancement appliances, like milk chillers, oil expellers, some of these products that can also run in an area with unreliable electricity that can actually run on, whether the solar energy comes from a microgrid or whether it comes from a standalone array. You can do grain milling, milk chilling, cold storage, things like that. These are, need to be affordable on the community level. And then the third track, imagine what a transformative difference it would make to public service delivery establishments like schools, rural healthcare centers, rural nursery schools, rural student accommodation, residence halls, and these types of areas. If they all had reliable lighting and fans in the hot weather, as well as maybe TV with local language content, all running on solar power, either through a solar home system or in whatever way the solar energy was delivered. But so there's a huge public service market for such appliances that would transform rural service and access to appliances. And finally, the fourth track is actually public safety. You could have solar street lights for sure. That would definitely improve safety for women and girls, especially after dark. But also you would have public drinking water facilities. We have people in India who are currently doing reverse osmosis projects using solar power to purify water. So if you had public clean drinking water points along with solar street lights and all these things, this is going to be another transformative improvement using solar energy in the rural space. And the last point I would like to make here is that actually we have an amazing situation in India with an intermittent grid coming to nearly all households, as well as abundance of sunshine. Now, there will be, if we can work on the affordability of these appliances, we believe that especially with the Saubhagya scheme, there will be an explosion of demand in rural areas for appliances.
Right.
And we will like to have appliances that run on AC current when the grid is available and on DC power when the grid is not available. So India could become the global home of AC-DC hybrid appliances, experimenting on the Indian rural consumer, meeting their needs, and then actually supplying these to the world, because there are about 4 billion people all over the world who live with intermittent power or no power at all. Thanks, I'll stop there.
Okay, all right, thanks very much indeed. Right, Mr. Gupta, would you like to go next on this point about when one talks of achievement, when one talks of success in electrifying villages, how do you actually measure that success when, if the survey seems to suggest a lot of people are still not happy?
Well, success.
I think you're the mic.
Success has to be seen what has been done compared to what was done earlier. Now, achieving the 100% household connections, of course I'll talk about the quality and the reliability in a moment, is definitely an achievement, and it is going to be achieved in a month or two. Let us understand in Indian context the cost of energy. That's a very important factor because of its affordability. There has been the experiments with the microgrids and mini grids, but the cost which the household has to pay for these is roughly about in the order of ₹20 per kilowatt hour. That's per unit, that's what they pay. Grid electricity is definitely going to be far, far cheaper. The microgrids, mini grids, and the solar-based alliances, particularly the solar energy, stable solar energy, which has been talked about, that has penetrated in the advanced countries much earlier because the tariffs there, they are based on the cost of supply. In rural area, if you really put the tariff based on the cost of supply, the solar-based appliances and the solar energy, the basically individual-based systems, they become far more attractive if your grid electricity its tariff is put as per the cost of supply, but that is not the case. So in that case, the grid electricity is going to be the basis. And grid electricity, once the grid has reached it, the connections have reached there, now the next step is to make it reliable, the quality power, and definitely it will be far more affordable than the alternative systems. I'm not saying it will be far cheaper, let us say 1 or 2 or 3 rupees per kilowatt hour. That will not be the case. But definitely it will be far cheaper than the other alternatives. Now, in the grid also, the electricity also comes from the renewable. Let us not be under any kind of doubt that it's all coal or the fossil fuel-based energy. The need, this report I view as a great report which removes some of the perceptions about the payment or the behavior of the customers. They say that they are willing to pay if you are providing a reliable and a quality electricity. Probably I would have liked the report to cover some of the households, rural households, from the states which had substantial rural household electrification for a long time. And the experience from them would have given a not what they are answering, but what actually is the case. In Gujarat, where the household electricity had reached quite a bit early, about 10-15 years earlier, the rural scenes had definitely changed. The rural activities, the rural appliances sale, the rural enterprises, they are huge. And the rural economy has really got a good flip.
Right.
It's really worth studying. Right. So that's what my comments are.
Okay, thank you. Now, let me just ask you, Mr. Mukherjee, whether you want to, I mean, you did have some introductory remarks, but if you also just want to make a brief intervention before we go to the discussion. One of the things I thought which was interesting that maybe if you want to touch upon is that this huge discrepancy you found in your report between the experience in states like Orissa, for example, and Uttar Pradesh. What was working in those states? What were the best practices there, which you think could be picked up by other parts of India?
Right. Okay, I might. So
yes.
Yeah, I'm good to go. So I would, definitely touch upon that. And in course of circling back to 3 points I want to make. One is specifically looking at this perception that rural electricity customer does not pay or does not want to pay. There is this very big perception that is out there. These are the same customers who religiously pay for their telecom bills. These are the same customers who religiously pay for their microfinance loans. These are the same customers who use some of our mini-grid electricity, which are much higher cost, as Mr. Gupta mentioned, and pay to other diesel operators who are providing backup. And they are they're paying 99% on time all these bills. So why are these customers being blamed for not paying their bills? Because it is actually the case when you look at the DISCOM results that they are not collecting more than 50% of their rural electricity supply. So this report actually tells you in the problem areas that you're only billing 50% or 60% of the customers. That too not billing them monthly, dumping a bill on 3-month basis or 6-month basis. Then after that, the bill is not accurate or you're not able to explain to them what this bill is about actually.
Right.
So that is one single biggest problem that is out there, and the DISCOMs are actually trying to solve it. They have made some advances, but this whole blame gets pinned on the poor rural electricity customer that he is not paying. And if you contrast that with areas in Gujarat, in Orissa, where we found outstanding service, timely billing, you find more than 90% collections.
Why was that? Was that because the quality of the DISCOM there is
Yeah,
Much better?
their services, they are billing on time, their billing are accurate, they are able to redress customer problems.
Right.
And you have this whole large set which is spoiling the image of the rural customer that they don't pay. In fact, the customer themselves is worried and dissatisfied about it. It's there in the report. The other thing that came out is that while everybody is aware that this electricity is cheap, it is highly subsidized by industrial and commercial customers. The report findings say that these customers are saying that only 34% believe that this electricity is affordable. Now that's a paradox. This is the cheapest electricity, and these people say that only, they don't believe it's affordable.
Okay.
So on unpeeling that, you discover why they are saying it.
Right.
One of them goes back to the billing issue. The other says that the service is erratic, there are too many outages, the voltage is low,
Right.
and I have to resort to backup measures, which are very much expensive.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's now open it up. Let me just ask you, Mr. Mishra, because many of the comments from what he was saying, also one of the findings in the report was that 50% of those surveyed face power cuts of 8 hours or daily, something on those lines. Now, we keep hearing from the government that we have become a power surplus country. Of course, this is now a sort of a claim which is renewed every year, but by all accounts, we seem to be a power surplus country. Why are we still then facing this problem of power cuts?
Okay, that's very interesting question and observation. We all see when we view it from the macro level.
Yes.
So when we say we are power surplus or almost at the power surplus level, we talk about the macro data of the India. But as we know, electricity supply, especially the distribution, is the responsibility of the state government. And state government decide how much power is to be provided to a particular set of consumers, be it household or agriculture or industry or commercial. It's totally in domain of state government. This is part one. Part two is, there can be local disturbances, which maintenance issues. Part three is, and which is very important, which has not yet been highlighted by other speakers, is the financial status of the distribution company or the DISCOM or utility, which we say. So depending on all these factors, the state government or the utility decides how much power it is going to supply to a particular set of consumer. So as a household consumer, if there is a power cut in your house, so that can be reason can be local maintenance issue. Their issue can be, the state government is unable to provide the subsidy which it was supposed to give to the consumers because a group of consumers are being given free electricity, or the utility is not in a financial status to provide it. So as a country, we are certainly at par for the power availability. It's all local and regional issues for which, want of which the power is restricted or there's a shortfall in supply.
Are you passing the buck?
No, I'm not passing the buck. No,
I'm just joking.
No. I'll just explain on that also. No, it's not passing the buck. As I said earlier, ministry, from the Government of India perspective, we have taken this initiative with the state, as I said earlier, that every state has to provide 24/7 power for all. And we have asked all the states are already on board. They have signed a document with Government of India that they are going to provide this. Now the issue, one issue which about the billing part and also this is the, how do we facilitate the consumer? So the solution is in providing a technological solution. So example in a billing, the traditional mode of billing is, bill is generated and then it is sent to the consumer and then the consumer will come to the office and pay the bill. So the solution is prepaid billing for the electricity sector too. As example he gave about telecom. So we all know that if we don't recharge our mobile in time, it's going to get put off.
Okay.
So technological solutions we have to find to enable the consumer in the near future.
Right. Mr. Mathur, now this question about the quality of the supply, the fact that we are on one hand supposedly power surplus, but we still have load shedding. He says it's to do with these state distribution companies. Many of them are in poor financial health. These become very big macro problems, which despite attempts by many governments, including this one, still remain vexed. So how do you move forward then?
The answer is, two levels. The first is at the level of communities. If communities are willing and able to pay, and as this survey report shows, there are communities who are willing and able to pay, is to provide them with options. The fact that every household is connected gives us a huge opportunity because there is grid electricity coming to them to enhance reliability, local distribution from solar, and solar is relatively inexpensive now.
Sure.
With some minimal amount of backup. Because you're getting grid, you don't need full backup. And that backup could also be charged when the grid electricity is there. This today makes business sense. Therefore, local producers, and that's what I spoke about, how do you get microgrids to integrate themselves with the universal electrification that occurs? The challenge, there's a relatively small legal challenge. Now that the grid is connected, these guys are no longer rural electricity providers who need no permission from the regulator.
Sure.
So what are they? So we would need to think of them. Would they be franchisees?
Right.
So there's a legal position we need to investigate, but otherwise this makes economic sense today.
Okay. You know, on the point of course, microgrids could be one solution that may take some time before it becomes viable at scale. But at the end of the day, power supply pricing is also about politics. And we're in election season. We can't be divorced from the wider context in which these decisions are taken. How much of a pressure is there on the government, on people like you, on policymakers, given the fact that nobody wants to burn their hands with trying to, you know, jack up power prices, charge power at variable rates, bill those at the lower end of the spectrum on one hand, and on the other trying to, you know, maintain the viability, both of distribution companies and of ensuring that you have adequate power supply.
Well, I would say the pressure is not in the central government end as far as the supply during the time of election is concerned. It's
not just during the time of election, I'm saying generally.
Generally also, generally this pressure is more at the state government end because the distribution finally is the responsibility and the domain of the state government. But having said that, see, it politically, I think it makes sense to supply a very reliable and quality energy, quality electricity supply. It's a definitely a, in my view, I have seen it in the states where the quality and the reliability has increased, it has returned the governments on this score.
For example?
Gujarat.
Right.
What we have seen is a total transformation when 24/7 electricity was supplied and how the people liked it and they rewarded the government. So I would definitely say it's what you require is a political will that is extremely necessary, that you are willing to curb the theft. You are not going to allow anybody to steal the electricity and not pay for it. Now, that's a political decision which has to be made at the state level, definitely. Right. And center probably has only a role to push the states. Much of the pressure must come from the public on the state governments to provide the quality electricity.
Okay. But you know, you were making the point that you have access to all these different appliances, but it's not viable because they're not getting distributed perhaps in the way that they ought to. You have some representatives of the government here on the panel with us. What do you think could be done? What more could be done? What would you say to them?
Well, definitely one of the things that we want is for these products to be available, as I mentioned, on small installment payments. So just to sort of go into one level of what we are looking at, we find that the distributors of these appliances actually need to be funded. They need working capital loans. We have been up and down the government knocking on doors, and I wouldn't just say the Indian government. I mean, we've been talking to other governments as well, basically asking for the blended, the grant portion of what we call the blended finance. That's a combination of loan and grant. So we haven't made too much headway with most of the ISA member country governments to actually stand in for the collateral, because these rural customers don't have collateral. They are low income and they cannot provide for collateral for their financing. The distributors also can't provide it because they're new startup companies. These products, especially with motors, have only existed in the marketplace for about 2 or 3 years. So they're new, and the end customers are low income. So we've been asking the governments to please help with this financing, put some collateral money, put some grant money on the table. This will leverage loans from banks.
Right.
And then basically so far, we haven't had too much of the vision that we need to have.
Okay. Would you like to respond to that?
See, from the government perspective, again, I'll say just I think more from the consumer's perspective. But from the government perspective, let's take it this way. We should, as a government, promote an enabling environment where private sector can come up to take up the responsibilities for a product which can easily be provided as a commercial product. So now we go back to the theory of public good and merit good and all those things. So are we looking at these appliances as something which is necessitated to be provided to poor at a subsidized price? That is the call we need to take. Or is there a market for such kind of thing where a financier is there who can take the initial hit and can provide appliances at installments? We have a very good example of LED bulbs. ESL has done that model of providing, taking that initial funding part of it and developing a market. Rather, they broke that price barrier which was there in the market, and LED prices came down substantially, and that was done without any government subsidy support. So we need to think more in terms of such kind of models where enablers can be provided and ecosystem can be developed by the government through regulation, through tariff policy, through rules, and where private sector can come up and provide such solutions.
Okay. I'm not sure how much time I have, but I suspect that we are running, we have only that much time, I'm told. So let's get quick comments from all of you. If you could just have solutions, very briefly, from each of you as to how you think we can try to improve the consumer experience for rural India. We've already heard some solutions in the course of this discussion, but if each of you could just summarize your idea in a gist, starting from my extreme right. Yes.
Most important, get the prices right. Regulators have in many states shown this is possible. It's happening in West Bengal of all states. It can be done. It is possible. And I think the political will is also there. There is a need for the political will and the technical methodology to come together.
Right. Mr. Vermani?
Yeah, sure. One very quick point here. I think a lot of this, government programs, whether it is, sanitation, electrification, public health,
yes,
they focus a lot on, infrastructure delivery. They focus a lot on the nuts and bolts. I think that the key thing here is when we are talking about the last mile customer experience, what my reading is that there is a need to build capacity at the last mile.
Okay.
The capacity at the last mile to really look at the customer not as a ratepayer, but a customer as a customer. So for that, I think capacity building is extremely important.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I think we need to provide more of technological solution for whatever issue is there. We can always find a technological solution for improving the ease of life, ease of living of the consumer. That is the key. And this is an aspirational India, and we need to provide to the aspiration. As I was discussing with somebody else in the back room, extrapolation of past is not future. Future is something different. So we need to provide and cater to the future.
Okay. All right.
I think it's rightly said, we have to provide the technological solution, and also the DISCOMs will have to be measured. Their performance has to be measured, and some sort of incentive or penalties imposed on them by the regulator to improve the quality. Without that, I think since they are the monopoly, and I don't know when this segregation or separation of the carrier and content in electricity sector would take place. Unless that takes place, By that time, the discoms will have to be made to perform with penalties and incentives.
Okay. Over.
So if I could just have one ask, I would like to follow on Mr. Mishra's comment about the EESL, which created a huge market for LED bulbs.
LED bulbs, yeah.
So we would like to ask the Power Ministry to take the lead, coordinate with other ministries like agriculture, like health, like education, and create that demand for 10 million, 100 million of these solar appliances and devices, which will be put in the public establishments. The other part will take care of itself. People will have their own versions of these for their houses as well. But please create a massive market for AC and DC hybrid appliances by leadership of the Power Ministry to the other ministries.
Right. He's smiling and nodding. I don't know if that means is that a yes?
No, it's just, the observation is taken up.
Okay. Noted. The classic sort of answer. Yes.
Yeah, the point I would like to make is that tariff plus service is equal to value. There has been too much emphasis on tariff and infrastructure and very little emphasis on service. And it is time to really focus on the service part, because the infrastructure is done. Tariff is really low, but if you can deliver value, you will have much more leverage on the tariff itself.
Right.
And I agree with all the panelists that yes, technology, I would even invite private sector and the off-grid solutions to integrate. But really, the government has created generation capacity, transmission, and done the whole distribution network and infrastructure, and there is no reason why it should not be fully flogged and the customers should be serviced well.
Okay. All right, wonderful. I think we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time, but thank you all for being a terrific panel. Some very, very constructive solutions and suggestions came out of it, and we do hope that those who are in charge of the levers of power are listening. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Before we conclude, I'd like to invite Mr. Vermani to make a vote of thanks. Thank you.
Well, I'll keep it quick and short. Thanks everyone for being such a wonderful audience. Thanks for the panel for your invaluable comments. I'd also like to thank the Rockefeller Foundation for powering this initiative, Smart Power India, and finally TERI for being such a gracious host. Thank you so much.
Come back. Yeah. I said, give me your phone number. Give him a pad. Okay.